Welcome to the Phoenix Effect podcast with Elle, Kristen, and Dennis. We are three narrative-trained therapists, and we will be interviewing storytellers from all walks of life. We will explore what people do to find belonging, purpose, and success. Listen in as we delve into the depths of the human experience. If you have a story you would like to tell, stay tuned to find out how to become a part of the show. Are you ready for a good story? Here we go. Welcome, Nathan.
Hi.
Can you tell our listeners where you are in the world and what you like to do when you're there?
Yeah, sure. My name's Nathan Key, and I live in Maine with my wife, who happens to be on this show. And
Not me.
it's not Dennis, so kind of narrows it down. We love living here. It's really nice outdoorsy stuff that I like to do. We actually just had a nice Father's Day weekend over at one of the state parks, and that was a lot of fun. Love spending time with the kids, soccer with a lot of the older ones, and even the younger one now who wants to kick the soccer ball around. And in my spare time, which is fleeting, I also like to make some music. And so got some guitars back here that I like to use to create some songs. And I guess professionally, I work in training and development. So I have worked in sales training, specifically in the insurance world, for a long time, and training and development for about 20 years, and sales training for about half of that, actually probably about 3/4 of that.
All right, this is going to be a hard podcast for me because Nathan likes to put a positive spin on everything, and that's great for him. But I'm the one that has to say, but here's this other piece of information that I feel is critically important. We did go to the state park for Father's Day, and it was great. It was very beautiful. But we had a situation where we had to cut it short that involved the youngest child needing a diaper change, and the woman in charge of bringing the diapers and wipes only brought the diapers. It was a thing. It wasn't pretty. And I just need our audience to know that piece too, because this now shows both of our styles of relating, which is part of what we talk about on this show. So there you have it. One of Nathan's styles is a very positive presentation. Thank you, Nathan.
I just blocked out all the bad stuff.
That's what I'm here for. And so when we do your story engagement, I'm going to let Kristen and Dennis take a lot of the lead because I have a lot of experience with pulling out the bad with you. So I'm only going to take a dive in when it's really juicy, or when I see your protective parts coming up. Not that it's bad. Your protective parts are welcome here. We're just going to notice it together for the purpose of letting the audience see this is what we do with it. And that's okay. Let's just notice. We're just going to notice. How was it for you to write the story?
It was tougher than I thought. So when you asked me to write a story, I mean, I've heard you on this podcast, and Dennis and Kristen and all your guests, and I've heard a lot of the different work that has been done through the Allender Center. So I knew what you were looking for, but then I had to really dig for something that I felt was appropriate without necessarily feeling like I was exposing more of myself than I really wanted to in public, or exposing more of other people than I thought was maybe appropriate. So I think it was challenging to find the right story that struck that balance between actually letting you engage with something and also not feeling throwing a story out there that may or may not be welcome for everyone in the world.
Yes, if your mother is listening to this podcast, this is okay, right?
Yeah.
It
Hey,
happened.
Mom.
This is true from your perception, which is what's
Yeah.
important. This is how you perceived it.
Yeah.
Okay, when you are ready to read, go for it.
Sure. All right. Nathan, please cut the fat off your steak. It's 5:40, and here we are, as always, sitting together at the table for family dinner. My parents have a predictable schedule. In the late afternoon, my mom begins dinner. Around 5:15, she requests that either my sister or my brother or I set the table. At 5:25, my dad comes home from work, gives my mom a quick kiss, and puts his briefcase away in the bedroom. And at 5:29, there's a call that dinner's ready, and by 5:30, we were there and ready to eat. Food is passed around the table, and we're expected to take no less than a no thank you helping of everything that's been prepared. There's winter squash in the freezer. I've seen it there. It serves as a reminder that I've said no one time before and it will never happen again. On that night, years ago, I sat at the table after everyone left. I wanted to swallow the rotten, slimy stuff and get it away from the table, but I just couldn't keep it down. It was like a door at the back of my throat had a sign reading no entry, and every time I tried to swallow it, it would just come back up. If you spit that out, you'll have to eat it all again, said my mom. I believe her, and so I sit staring at my plate, hoping that somehow it will magically move to my stomach without passing by my taste buds. Eventually, I was sent to bed early and told I could have winter squash for breakfast since I wasn't going to eat it for dinner. And at some point during the next day, my will or my gag reflex prevailed, and my parents relented and informed me that I could have one food that I didn't have to eat. But they kept a package of frozen winter squash available at all times, with the frequent threat that if I ever refused anything else again, it would be winter squash for my next meal. Now, thankfully, this evening, there's nothing I'm opposed to eating. We're having steak, bread, boiled broccoli. I'm on board with this meal, and I begin spreading a hearty amount of butter on a potato roll I've claimed from the wicker basket that made its rounds. Once the bread's gone, I tackle the broccoli. Boiled broccoli without seasoning or butter is pretty bland, but I can tolerate it. Years later, I'll learn that cooked broccoli with any kind of seasoning or butter is actually pretty good. But for now, I'm eating it in between two foods that I really like. That way, I figure if you have to eat bland vegetables, do it in the middle so that you can start and end with something enjoyable. Speaking of enjoyable, the steak is one thing my mom knows how to make. I cut a strip and savor the flavor in my mouth. Nathan, says my mom, cut the fat off. Hardly hearing, I cut another piece and chew. Nathan Samuel Key, I look up. At 16, do I really need to cut your food for you? We don't eat the fat on the steak. Mom, it's the best part of the steak, I say, cutting another piece. Do not put that in your mouth, she says, pointing to her own plate. In this house, we cut the fat from the steak. It's not healthy to eat that much fat. And why did you serve it to me? Rage is welling up inside of me, and I can feel my chest tighten and my vision narrow. No one at this table is eating the fat from the steak. My mom matches my tone for tone, and it's only a matter of time before one of us loses it. You wouldn't serve me a Snickers bar and make me cut the chocolate off before I ate it, would you? It's the same thing. Why would you serve me something and then tell me I can't have it? It's me who loses it this time. I stand. You're not excused, she yells at me as I head to the door. I don't care, and I yell back, and I head out the front door into the Florida evening. It's hot, and I put my head down and ignore the yells from my mom as I set out to walk the subdivision for the next hour to cool off before coming back home. By that time, my meal is in the trash. No fat for me, after all.
Thank you, Nathan.
What was it like for you to read your story, Nathan?
I think I actually started disassociating a little bit in the middle of it. Like I was actually reading it, but I was just reading it as if I was reading a story, not necessarily reading my story. I think there was a couple of moments where I felt some emotion coming in, but yeah, I had written this a few months back, and then it sat here, and I read it this morning. And as I was reading it, I think it was easier for me to just go into reading mode than it was necessarily to feel everything in that story.
Yeah, already you have your protective parts showing up to keep you safe from something in this story.
Yeah. I read it so well, though.
Yes, you also read it very quickly. I'm curious what that was about.
I do talk fast, so that may be part of it. I think the other part is maybe I was getting a little bit more emotionally charged than I think, because when I do think of this story, there's this like idea that I've got to be quicker on my feet. And so that may have been part of the speed as well. I'm inside of me thinking I've got to get to the part before everybody else does so that I can figure out what to say next if I need to. That's a good question. I hadn't thought about that in terms of reading it quickly.
There's one part in your story where you do express like some feeling. You're talking in the story about the tightening of your chest and like the narrowing of your eyes.
Yeah.
And was there any sense for you? I noticed that your speed seemed to quicken, and I wasn't sure if maybe you were feeling elevated. Was there some feeling as you read that for you just now?
Yeah. Yeah, that maybe it was just trying to bypass the feeling of rage. So if I read it quickly, I can just get past that, because that was a common experience between my mother and I. These rage fights that would just get elevated, and so that may have been me just trying to like bypass that feeling by reading it quickly. Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't really thought about that as I'm glad you guys noticed that.
But is that, and then that's the feeling that you were describing of the constricting of your chest and the narrowing of your eyes.
Yeah.
That's rage. That's your internal rage.
Yeah, yeah. When I get stressed or when I feel like I need to defend myself, I get like I can feel my chest constricting, and I get like just this very focused feeling. It's not necessarily pain, but it's a very focused feeling that's like right over the ridge of my eyes to my temples.
Yeah. Where does that go? You're feeling that. Where ultimately does that rage go?
Tell me more about that? Do you mean like where does it go in memory, or do you mean where does it go in my body? Or
Yeah, let's even just take this story. In this story, those were real feelings, and
yeah,
you're describing it to us even better as this is my rage. I'm fucking pissed.
yeah. Even though my mom and I had these big blowouts, it wasn't. So you'd think it would be welcome, but it really wasn't welcome. And by 16, because that's when this story takes place, a two-parter, right? It goes back to when I was a young child, but it also has to do when I was a high schooler. I think I'd gotten to the point where I just didn't want to I didn't want to be that person anymore. I didn't want to engage in people in this blowout argument style. And so I left. I exited the building literally and went for a walk so I could just cool down. And it's like in the process of just going through that experience with myself and then just being able to physically just work out that anger through walking, I was able to come back and engage. I don't know. I don't remember offhand how the rest of that story went. I don't know that we even really talked about it much after that. After getting back, we probably did, but it was just one of those things where I felt it. I think I engaged in it, and then I needed to just get out of there and just let it out in a different way, because that was something I didn't want to be, that person anymore. I didn't want to be a person that was going to be explosive in anger.
But it's interesting that you had to get out. You had to leave.
Yeah.
What was it? Was it welcome to have a discussion? Like, I'm trying to imagine what the discussion looked like that you were even referring to. So maybe there was a discussion you're thinking when you came back. What would it look like, do you think? What did it look like?
It's a good question. At 16, I'm thinking like where I was in life, because I was probably like a sophomore or a junior in high school. And again, it may not have been 16 exactly. I'm just putting that there. It was like summer.
Yeah.
It might have gone to just reaffirming with my mom, her just basically blasting me for doing what I wanted to.
What I noticed in the story, if you don't mind my noticing, was for you, when you wrote the story, in your perception, you don't remember a conversation. The food was just in the trash.
Yeah.
That's what she did with her rage.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so from your best memory, there is no conversation, and that makes a really big statement as well.
Yeah.
No discussion. Food in the trash.
Yeah. My meal's in the trash. So that's it, right? I've lost my opportunity to get anything I wanted, right? And that's a familiar feeling, that there's a power of wills between me and my mom, especially. My dad somewhat too, but my mom and I especially. It's if there's an area where we're not aligned, especially when I'm younger, when she's more powerful than me physically and that has that parent role, it's you will do whatever you need, whatever I say. And then as I'm getting older into 16, she's no longer going to be powerful enough to maybe force me to do something, but she's going to force me to do it anyway. She's going to find her own way to get her own way.
And there's going to be a lack of a conversation, because there's two stories here that you brought. Really, both are extremely similar, and not much maybe had changed that you're even noting. Like,
yeah,
it's not okay as this kid to really have a real conversation about what it's like to try to eat slimy food for you.
Yeah.
Instead, there's a reminder in the refrigerator. And then the second story, there's a reminder in the trash can for you.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the reason I picked these two is because it was like almost the opposite. One was you have to eat it, and the other one's you're not allowed to. And it was really confusing for me as a kid.
Yeah.
The second one, especially. The first one, my parents just want me to eat stuff. Like, I don't say that's necessarily right. Like, I think kids should have some sort of autonomy to choose what they do and don't eat. But okay, like my parents want to make me eat whatever they want. The second one was just confusing because it just blindsided me. Like, you served me this food. I'm expected to eat everything, clearly. And yet you tell me now in the middle of it, I can't eat. Like, what is going on?
Yeah. What do you make of that? Like, normally food ought to be like one of the things that we can look forward to.
Yeah.
And you've got a house that is extremely calculating, extremely, everything should be very consistent. It looks like there is a schedule for everything.
Yeah.
Everything should be like very much you ought to know.
Yeah.
And yet at dinner, you don't know what. I mean, man, I'm wondering what it's like. What is it like when you don't even know what you're going to get? You can't refuse what it is. Like, holy shit.
Yeah. And I have a reminder in the freezer that if you don't eat it, you're going to get this instead. The thing you hate the most is waiting in the sidelines just in case you ever say no again.
And my guess is that reminder was never explicitly stated to you.
I think it may have been implied or suggested maybe early on, like when I was younger, the younger parts of me, just so I knew what it was there for. But then it sat there. I think we had winter squash in the freezer on tap, so to speak, just in case for the rest of my childhood. Frozen, not even the good stuff, not even fresh, just a frozen package of winter squash.
I feel hemmed in when you talk about this story. Like there's no room for you. I'm like a twisting in my stomach with the thought of winter squash. And so I'm curious about that. If that's what's happening in my body, what's happening in you as you talk and process how little room there was for you.
Yeah. I think it's hard. It's hard to even know, because when I'm in that situation where it's just I have no autonomy, there's not even room to process that, because it's just, this is the way it is. This is what the rule is. And so I don't even know that I knew that there was another option that obviously I thought there might be, because I expressed no at one point, but it was pretty clear that this is your one buy. This is the one opportunity you have to say no, and you don't get another one. And so I don't know that I even thought about what that feeling would be, because it was just, like you said, hemmed in. This is it. This is the option you're under. This is the world you live in, where you just eat what's put in front of you. And if you don't, then there's going to be something terrible that happens.
Yeah, we need you to have gratitude and understanding. We're not going to make you. We could make you eat this. We're not gonna.
Yeah.
Because of our benevolence.
Yeah.
Our kindness is here's a representation of our kindness in the freezer for you to remember.
Yeah, you got your will that one time, but really it's now like this like lever we have to pull where you never get it again.
They can't allow that. Why do you think that is?
Now that I have kids, I mean, I think the easiest answer is I don't necessarily have the chance to cook 5 different meals for everybody. So hey, this is what we're going to have tonight. So I think that's maybe part of it. But the other part of it is like maybe a little bit beyond that, where it's not only going to eat what we have, but like, it's just not like maybe your opinion of this says something about me. I don't know if that's true or not. I'm trying it out. Like thinking about, if I say I don't want something, how does that reflect on my mom or my dad? Because they cooked it, and it's really more about their ability to cook, or their ability to prepare something, and now I'm saying I don't want it. And that could feel like, if I know from having kids, if I make something they don't like it, it's hard not to take that personally, but to set up a system where it's just not an option to not, that's tough.
Something feels threatening, Nathan. So like something feels threatening.
Yeah.
Something feels threatening, that if you're allowed space or freedom to express your individual desires, that seems really threatening. And I'm trying to sort out.
You said the word something really bad could happen.
Yeah. In this case would be, I have to have winter squash, right?
I'm wondering if it's more than that. What would it have meant for you?
I wonder if for me, the winter squash in the freezer was like, also, I'm testing this out. I don't know if this is right or not. This is like the first time I've been considering this. That is my will on display. Like, I actually got out of it. Like, I actually figured out a way out of this debacle. But if I give in anywhere else, then that's gone. So it's like I have this victory I can look at, and it's like the one last thing that I can look to say I won at some point in time. And something bad isn't just the eating the winter squash. It's not only did I have to eat the winter squash, which is awful, but I also lost my will again, because that, at least I have that one thing that I was able to say no to, that I was able to stand up to and win, because it just wasn't there wasn't another option. You don't win. But in this case, I did.
Yeah. I find the word choice very interesting. You're talking about this as a victory. And then that gives me a sense that you're on the other side. They might be framing this as like a defeat. That's crazy. And why does it have to be like a battle with winners and losers? Why can't you be working together?
It's dinner. It's not.
Yeah.
I have dinner with people all the time that don't like stuff, and it's okay, fine. Don't eat it then. It's fine.
Yeah.
You don't take it personally. You were very generous a moment ago and said it can hurt our feelings if our kids don't like what we prepare. I have never witnessed you taking it personally. So can we just stay there for 1 minute? You don't take it personally. But in this setup, there was a lot on the line.
Yeah, there's a real sense of like rules that especially my mom has. And it's just, if they don't go the way that she needs them to go, it's dysregulating for her too. And so I think this is one of those things for her that was one of those rules. Like at dinner, this is what everybody does. And if it doesn't go that way, then like that doesn't fit within her paradigm of how things should go. And so that's not good.
And there's the threat that Dennis mentioned. There's the threat. What's going to happen?
Mom loses it. I think depending on how old I am, it looks different. Like when I'm real young, it's spankings, right? It's the wooden spoon or like spankings that happen. I can remember one instance where I'm under the bed and my mom's like throwing water at me because I wouldn't come out from under the bed. And then as I get older, it's either like a raised voice or restrictions, or again, like her needing to have things a certain way. And it's, if I don't fit within that, she is definitely setting a tone that she's dysregulated. Even as I get into adulthood, there's like going to the kitchen and banging dishes around to let everybody else know how upset she is at what's going on. Yeah. She's gonna do the dishes as loudly as possible so everyone knows just how frustrated she is, and make the entire tone of that environment really uncomfortable for everyone emotionally, so that we all can feel however she's feeling.
Yeah. And if I can move into a slightly different area with something I was noticing, and then I've got an idea of some other questions related to this that might bring us back to where we're at right now. But
yeah,
one of the things that struck me was just like your dad coming home and like immediately going to the room with his briefcase, like clockwork. Was there a time where, was there like a time where you were being like delighted in there for a minute? So when he comes home, does he like lift you up, spend time with you? What does it look like? Do you remember?
Yeah, I'd say when I was real little, like my mom would start dinner and she'd put us in front of the TV. So we were watching TV. So my dad would come in through the garage, immediately go and give my mom a kiss and then leave. So it wasn't there wasn't a hello, everybody else. That was the mood, right? That was the mode he was in. He would car, give my mom a kiss, get everything up to and it wasn't like a long drawn out process where he's in the bedroom for 20 minutes. It was like bedroom, put the stuff down, come back down, and dinner's right afterwards. So I don't think it was necessarily exclusionary, but it certainly wasn't like come see the kids on the way upstairs to drop off everything. I think when I'm older in the Florida house, it's a little harder to not necessarily engage with us at all because he's like it's an open floor plan as opposed to our Pennsylvania house where we're off in the annex where it's easy to get by. But it was still kiss my mom, go around the island, go to the bedroom, drop everything off and come right back. And again, it wasn't like he was disengaged necessarily, but I wouldn't say that he went out of his way to find me and my brother and my sister before putting the stuff down.
I guess I'm curious too. Always just your own way of saying, hey, like as much as it might hurt you, if the kids don't like what you make, you're so loving as a dad. And I'm just curious, like when you come home from your sales presentations and a hard day at work, when you see the kids, what goes on for you?
Well, it probably depends on the day, but often I'm like picking up Alex and giving him a big hug and helping him out or asking the kids what they're doing. Sometimes some going and escaping. I won't deny it, right? But I don't know. Elle will keep me honest.
I don't believe you have the
it.
opportunity. I don't believe you have the opportunity to escape. Your run towards your name is shouted in celebration. It's the beginning of a party.
Yeah, dad's home.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what it ought to be. Like, and then I feel like I'm so sad because I felt like you missed that. Like you weren't delighted in that way. Like you deserved that. You needed that. And that didn't happen. And I'm just trying to make some sense of like when your dad came in, holy shit, why didn't he come in and hey, son?
That's a good question. The story wasn't supposed to be about my dad. I'm tearing up here. Again, I don't want to make excuses. My dad's like much more of an introvert than my mom is. My mom's, I don't know if she's an extrovert or an introvert, but he didn't seem like he had a lot of he wasn't absent. Like we did things together, but he was working most of the day and he'd come home. And yeah, I don't know that I ever had that feeling of delightment from my dad. Again, I don't necessarily feel like he was not there. He came to a lot of the things that we did, right? But I don't know that I was running into my dad's arms and jumping and couldn't wait to have him swing me around, right? Yeah.
The emotion that popped up, it's just telling the truth of your story. You miss that. And that desire is there.
Yeah.
And it's a good desire.
I wish for that.
I'm like struck with the absence of your father as a voice at the table.
Yeah. In this instance, I don't remember if he was even there. I think that's the most telling thing. Part of me thinks that it may have been a day that he was just not around. Like maybe there was something that like he wasn't on business trips very often, but there's part of me that just wonders if he wasn't there for some reason, which was uncommon. But there was occasions when he just wasn't there. But the other part of me is he just wasn't there. Like he was there and he talked to us, but it was my mom's show. Like everyone knew that, and he didn't step in and intervene very often. If my mom had something very strong to say, he's just the quiet type that will answer questions and he'll even ask us what we're doing, but he's not necessarily just sharing his fatherly wisdom or intervening on behalf of his kids, or even the one that necessarily jumps into discipline.
Why might that be, do you suppose?
Part of me thinks it's my mom is just such a strong force that like everyone just keeps it at bay, right? Like it's just easy. Like just let mom do her thing because we don't want to upset the apple cart. So that's part of it. And then the other side of it is just I just wonder if he just didn't necessarily understand how to connect to us. Yeah, even to this day, I know he loves me, but I don't think I've ever heard those words.
Yeah.
And so I don't know that he grew up in a family where that stuff was necessarily like talked about or just described. Although I have an uncle as his brother that's very warm and very outgoing, and it's the opposite. Again, I don't really know what to make of that. So it's,
What would it
again, it's
mean?
confusing.
Yeah. What would it mean if he actually had seen what you needed and he noticed that there was a lot of control and maybe even things that maybe he didn't agree with? What would it mean then if he like just watches?
Yeah, he's contributing to an environment where my mom gets to do what she wants to do. It's the bystander, not that he's a bystander in the family in some ways, right? He's
Mhm.
watching this all play out, and he does have the authority. Because I don't know if this is true, but like the story I tell myself is at this point in time is that it was probably my dad that stepped in and said, "Hey, we're not going to have this argument over the winter squash. We're just going to let him not eat it." Because I think if it was just between me and my mom, like I would have been sitting there all night, or I would have gone to bed and had it for breakfast the next morning. And I feel like that might have been like the one advocacy that my dad had is, hey, we're not gonna do this. So I think there was like these certain lines where if it got to that point, then he would step in. But there was just like a whole lot of breadth of dysregulation that was allowed before that, because I don't think it was comfortable for him either. I don't think he knew what to do with that. And so it was just easier just to hope that the rest of us would figure it out and not upset the apple cart either.
I gotta dive
And
in.
okay.
The winners, it got to the point of a little boy starving at night. It gets to that point before he steps in. And even now, how you're framing the squash in the freezer, it's a good thing. It was a kind thing.
Mm.
But it doesn't feel kind in my body when I think about that squash in the freezer.
No, it doesn't feel kind to me either. It feels like a threat hanging over my head the whole time. I think I reframed it as a victory simply because that's the only way I could not rationalize it. That's not the right word, but the only way I could live with it, maybe.
Because you are the one person in this story that will upset an apple cart in the name of autonomy.
Yeah. Yeah. My siblings had the offer extended to them that they could also pick a food, and they never did. And I think that part of them not doing it, not picking one, was because they didn't know what they wanted. What would it mean to say no and actually pick something? That's first. And then secondly, that's a hard choice to be like, this is the one thing. And to always have that option that it might not be this thing. Maybe it's something else worse that comes along. Maybe it's better to keep my options open. So they had that same choice put in front of them too. And they just decided to not take the choice and to not actually stand up and have that. And I think that was their way of just trying to keep options open. And maybe that's their way of expressing their freedom is I could always say no if I wanted to, but I won't on this because something else might come along that's worse. I was the one person that said no. I was the one that actually took the stand.
And that's what I love about this story. When you describe standing up and leaving the house and yelling, I want to rise up too. I start to feel that energy too. I'm rooting for the boy that leaves the house. How does that feel to you that you were the one that stood up and left the house?
Thanks. I think when I was writing it, I was thinking more like, I wasn't thinking about that as a victory. I was thinking about that more like a way not to lose, because if I lost it, then I lose. And I was on the brink of it. So it's almost like I was leaving in shame because I like had gone there. And so it's like, I got to get out because I can't face the fact that I'm that person right now. But yeah, the person that does actually take a stand and leaves the situation, and like I still didn't get what I wanted. wanted to eat the great steak and the little fat on the side, but at least I didn't have to sit there and listen to it. I didn't have to engage in it. I could just remove myself from the situation. I guess that is like a small victory.
And to wrap up, I still think
Yeah.
that's who you are. You're still the person that will rise up and take a stand against injustice. You still do that. And that's one of the most beautiful parts about you. And I'm so glad that you're the one that stands up and says no. And that's where we end today. We are so glad you joined us. We want to invite you to get involved in the show. First, be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. That way, you don't miss out on a future episode. If you're super curious, you can also find us on YouTube. Second, if you'd like to learn more about joining us and sharing your story, send us an email at phoenixeffectpodcast@gmail.com. That's phoenixeffectpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. This podcast and website represents the opinions of Elizabeth Key, Kristen Boskel-John, and Dennis Roberts, and their guests to the show and website. The content here should not be taken as medical or psychological advice. This content is for informational purposes only, and because each person is so unique, please consult your healthcare professional for any medical questions. The views and opinions expressed in the podcast and website are our own and do not represent that of our places of work. While we make every effort to ensure that the information we are sharing is accurate, we welcome any comments, suggestions, or correction of errors. No guarantee is given regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on the podcast or website. In no way does listening, reading, emailing, or interacting on social media with our content establish a therapist-client relationship.